Okay. Hi, Randy. This is wonderful to have you here with us today. This is Captain James Burke, otherwise known as Randy Burke, a cousin of mine, actually. And he's here with us to talk today about veterans. And he's a Navy veteran, he's a retired Navy veteran, and the experience that he's seen, and also some of what we're seeing now in this particular health pandemic that we're in. So thank you so much for being with us, Randy. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Wish we could have done this on Memorial Day weekend, but I'm glad to finally connect with you.
I think it's wonderful. Thank you. And thanks for making the time. So tell us, Randy, what made you decide to join the Navy?
I will make a long story short. I wanted to go to college. My dad had just gotten out of law school. The money was not there. So I asked my counselor, hey, I need a full ride. She said, well, you're a good football player, but you're not that good. And you're pretty smart, but you're not that smart. So why don't you go to one of the service academies? So I didn't even know what it was. He said, have you seen the Army Navy game? I said, well, yeah, that's a bunch of guys who are in the Army playing the Navy. She said, no, it's a college and it doesn't cost you anything. In fact, they'll pay you to go through. He said, sign me up. And ended up, there is a process by which you need to be nominated by a congressman. But long story short, I got the nomination to the Naval Academy. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. That wasn't available. So I went to the Naval Academy and just took it from there. Took one step at a time. I had was going to get out as soon as I could out of the Navy, and then I got out on the fleet on a submarine then, and just found it that it was my line of work, and it was a life of purpose. I always felt strongly about that, and so I enjoyed that, and I was going to get out in 2011. I'm sorry, 2001. And I had two friends killed that day, one in the North Tower, one in the Pentagon. And suddenly I said, no more retirement, get me in. I want to go as close as I can. They said, sir, you're kind of old and we'd really rather not give you a gun because we're afraid you're going to shoot one of us. So anyway, I ended up staying in for the entire 30 years. And the last 10 years was probably the most rewarding, and ended up getting out in 2011.
That is quite a story, Randy. So on two different occasions, you thought, well, I might be finished with this. And then the first time you got out there on a submarine, you decided you were in love with it. And then the second time you decided that you needed to stay in because your service was needed. But that's quite a story, Randy. I appreciate you sharing that with us. But then you did retire ultimately in 2011, right?
Yes.
Congratulations. And I think that today is the 9-year anniversary of your retirement. Is that right?
That's exactly right. 1 June of 2011.
Well, wonderful. And thank you for your 30 years of service. That is tremendous. Over the course of those 30 years, what were some of the most interesting things that you saw? What struck you the most about serving in the Navy?
It would have to be in the last 10 years. I was stationed in the Horn of Africa. Now, at the time, that's when piracy off the coast of Somalia, and there were a lot of problems with that. And my home base was in Djibouti, which is about 20 miles from the Somali border. And I had to do a lot with the piracy stuff, but working with other services, we had to work with the French. Their base was right across the runway from us. It's the largest base for French Foreign Legion anywhere. So it's a very important and strategic strait there because all the oil goes to Europe from Arabia, or the Middle Eastern countries here. So it's very strategic. We were there, and I got to work. Allies got to work with the African nations, and when I first got to Africa, everything just seemed very squalid, very basic. And then after you're there for a while and you get out and you meet the people, they don't have much and they will give anything to you. I mean, that was my experience with it. Mm-hmm. So richness of experience, that is probably the most rewarding that I had.
That's extraordinary. Thanks for sharing that. And then after you got out, we have a lot of veterans in the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes, and I know that we have various VA options and services available to veterans. But what has been your experience since you departed in terms of services that are available and the support network that's there?
Night and day. When I was in, I got excellent health care. If I needed to see a doctor, I got there. I got the care I wanted. My family, if they needed to see a specialist, no issue with that, got that taken care of. And I didn't have to worry about paying for it. I was taken care of, and it was very good. And then
Oh, you were taking care of us, so that makes sense.
well, I'm glad it did, because it sure was good healthcare. It's healthcare for all. That's what you should look. And then when I got out, I went in the VA system is different from the regular Navy system. And you may go to the same hospital, but the coverage of items and who pays it comes out a different pot of money. And there was also a VA administration. So for us out here in the middle of the country, and I guess up there in the more remote areas, you have VA hospitals. And what says VA hospital, that means veterans only, but that's a different system, different doctors in areas like that. And I went to Texas, and I went to the VA center in Denton, Texas, a little north of Dallas. And when I went in there, I said, okay, I'm a veteran. I need to get a doctor. I need to set up here. And they said, come back in 3 months. And I said, well, what time, what doctor am I going to see? They said, no, just come back here. You need to show up in person, and then we will find you and see if we can't get you an appointment. So it was infinite delays. I would have guessed that it would have taken 6 months for me to see a doctor. So I had the VA system was full at the time, because there had been so many injuries, critical injuries from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It has since gotten better. The capacity has surged. And so that it's not, the waiting is not what it used to be. So I took a different option. It's called Tricare. It's one in which 20% copay, but I am out in the market just like everyone else. Springfield, Missouri, third largest city in Missouri, is only 40 miles away. Excellent health care. So I get good health care, accessible, but I have to pay 20%.
And so what you're saying is it's a totally different administration, a totally different budget system for folks who are in the military versus veterans. And when you got out, you experienced that the resources just aren't there for the veterans.
No, they're not. It is better than when I got out, 2011, but it is still, I have a lot of veterans friends here that are in the veterans system, VA system, and they all complain.
Well, and I really take to heart your point that perhaps there wasn't enough advanced planning for the number of casualties that we would be seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah. The number of folks who would need support.
Yeah, and the ones that were critically injured, when they're on active duty, when they're injured, they get very good care. When they retire, they go to the VA system, and those folks have a different level of care, as they should. But for those of us, I didn't get shot at and I didn't get injured, it's a little bit different ballgame.
And so what do you think now that we're in a global health pandemic? How do you think that is affecting folks in the military, or perhaps folks who are retired like yourself?
Well, I've experienced like you, I'm experienced the coronavirus the same as you right now. It has an enormous impact on the Navy, because the Navy missions will not stop. They can't. Global presence is a key element of national security, so we can't stop. And when you're on a ship, and you remember the cruise ships with coronavirus, how quickly and how widespread it was. Well, you have an element of privacy on those. On Navy ships, you may be in berthing compartments with the 3 bunk beds that just go for 50 or 60 feet. There'll be 100 people that sleep in a compartment. So, and you got showers and that sort of stuff. So you're very, very close quarters, so you can't have it on ships because it will spread very fast. And Theodore Roosevelt, which is in the news, had something like 1,100 sailors affected. Now that was all at the beginning of all this happening. So what they're doing now is they will do testing on recruits when they say, I want to sign up. Okay, take a test. If you pass, you can go in. And then when they report to boot camp, I got to take another test. So that's the entry point there. So there is a strategy that involves testing. Unfortunately, for deploying sailors, what they will do, they don't have enough tests. So what they'll do is they'll quarantine them. Sequestration is what they call it. I don't know the details of that, but the point is they separate them from the population 2 weeks before they deploy. And they'll take their temperature.
You can see during that period whether anything emerges.
And they will go and they'll take questionnaires to see where have you been, have you traveled out of country, and there's a whole list of questions that develops a risk assessment. The sailors that are high risk have to undergo special, I won't call it special treatment, but they have to have specific authority from their commanding officer before they can deploy. So that now, when you were deploying for 6 months, the first thing you want to do all the way up until you deploy is be with your family, because you're going to be gone for a long time. That's certainly restricted.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the details of that, but the last thing you want to do 2 weeks before deploy is not be with your family. So I'm sure there is some visitation. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how the quarantine affects it, but I sure as heck would, if I was deploying, would not have to go through that. Of course I would, but
you wouldn't want to. Yeah,
I certainly wouldn't want to.
But at the same time, what you're describing is, a bunk system where you've got 100 folks all in one space and really close quarters, all on a ship. Yeah, you can imagine how fast a virus would move through something like that.
Yeah, and that's what we saw on the Theodore Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think happened there?
I think someone got coronavirus, and this was a beginning, didn't know they had it, and it took them a while to figure it out.
Yeah.
That it was coronavirus. You have excellent doctors on those carriers, but it just took them a while. People didn't know about it. And I think through the asymptomatic spread that it just got everywhere. So that's what happened. So widespread.
Yeah.
A third of the crew was infected ultimately.
Well, very similar to what happens in communities, in cities, in anytime you have a large group of people coming together, subway system, that's, I think, a lot of what happened in New York City. And if you don't catch it early enough, it exponentially moves really fast.
Anything with high density populations, down here where I live, it's sparsely populated, and we've only in 2 counties, and I live on the border of them. We have 10 cases in one county and 10 cases in the other. In that one county, one was a veterans home, and 8 veterans died.
That's where it spread, was in a veterans home, huh?
Mm-hmm. In the one county.
And we're seeing that in nursing homes and in close quartered communities all over the place. That sure is where it spreads. What do you think as community members we should do to be supportive of our veterans, to recognize that there is this challenge that perhaps the veteran services aren't as well funded as they perhaps would like to be, and they're just not able to support the veterans as well as we'd like? What do you think as an average community member someone could do to help out and support our veterans?
I think it's got to be through the ballot. It's got to be something like that. Because the good thing right now is people willingly support veterans. When I came in after the Vietnam War, that wasn't the case, but it is now. And I think veterans, thank you for your service. You said it earlier, that happens a lot. And so the support is there, but it's got to be the conversation about the underfunding, taking care of our veterans out there, because it's an aging population typically for veterans. So they're going to need more health care, but the resources are just not there. It's going to have to, and this is leadership at all levels, I think. So the message gets up to the folks that in Washington get more resources for the veterans, because it's really unless you live in a big military concentration area where there are hospitals, excuse me, and access to special and that sort of thing, there is just not the resources that they should get for a VA hospital. Anyone who's ever been in one will know that you're in a VA hospital and not a regular hospital.
Because it's just a little bit more bare bones, maybe. It
is more bare bones. It's still hard to get access to specialists. And I don't think the care, some of the things you do to find out what's really wrong, I think they'll kind of, still kind of sugarcoat a little bit. Let's go on to the next one, because the system just doesn't have the capacity to issue.
Mm-hmm. Overtaxed. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, what is one thought that you'd like to leave us with as we think about, Memorial Day just happened a week ago, and obviously we salute and support our veterans on that day, but there's a whole year of days out there too that perhaps we should be paying close attention to. And what's one final thing you'd like to share there?
I think the support is there for the veterans, and it's not just on Memorial Day. I don't think. What I see, and I'm kind of getting off the subject here, is there has to be leadership. Has to be leadership, and it's got to come from the top. I don't see that happening right now, but you have to get strong leadership and bring the country together. And I think if you can do that, like we've done it in the past, if you can do that, all the turmoil that's going on right now, you're still going to have stuff that happens, but it will not be as long lasting and not as severe.
Well, Captain James Burke, you know about leadership. You led a lot of people, and you know about the need to inspire and lead those folks. And so I appreciate those thoughts and those words. Randy, on a personal note, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us. And I hope that this gives the folks that are listening and thinking about this some ideas of how we can recognize that we have to support those folks who have chosen to go into the military and support us after they leave. And that it isn't just while they're in the military that we need to support them, but we sure owe them a real debt of gratitude after they leave. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much, Randy.
Well, thank you. Good luck in re-election. You got my vote.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.